Welcome to part 8 of the module 2. We're going to be covering the draft and management operations today. This section advances on the previous parts 5 through 6, which covered CRUD for the database. This is create, read, update, and delete. This section keeps to the model view controller service architecture that we've established for the earlier parts of the tutorial. We're going to be implementing business logic validation. For example, checking the status of the content just generated from the AI to see if it's been approved for publication or not, as well as the ownership. We'll learn about the state transitions, the draft, and the pending reviews. This is a human state where you mark the AI generated content as draft, or you submit it for review by other people, or you set it as published. And then there's this error handling with descriptive messages if one of the portions of the flow were to stop. This tutorial series focuses on a model view controller service, also called MVCS, sometimes shortened to MVS, model view service, although there is absolutely a controller in this architecture. We haven't focused on it yet. The components that we have focused on for this tutorial series is the model. The first part of the series focused on the SQL model classes. We built a new one called Food Description, which is holding the primary content that is generated from the AI. We're also using the other fields within this model to hold information on date, time, human interaction, approval status for the workflow. There is a view component, which we haven't covered yet. There is a templates folder off the root of the project that holds Jinja 2 HTML syntax templates. These are like HTML files, but they have some Python syntax in it that makes it easier to interact with the rest of the Python application. There's a controller component, which is in a routes sub folder. Within there, there's a number of different endpoints that we are defining with some level of logic. We also have a separate services folder where we have core services and services. This is where we've been working for the last 2 or 3 videos. We've been working on a class for food description CRUD with a number of methods in it. This is handling the create, read, update, and delete functions. Because we have this service layer and we don't put the logic into the controller, it's a little bit different than a standard MVC model, which you may be familiar with from other projects or other languages. The service layer we're using to hold the more, weightier pieces of Python code, and it works as a separation between the business logic from the controllers and the view. Here are some of the learning objectives from this course. We have a database design. We've covered some of that in the model. We also used migration and editing the migration files before executing it and putting it into SQL. There's application architecture, which we are pretty heavy in right now. Human in the loop. The LLM section was covered in a previous module, the connection portion, where we covered the integration with the LLM, where we're covering the UI components. So the model was the database design as well as the migration file, migrate, create, migrate, upgrade. The application architecture is what we've been talking about, the model view controller service. Because we're dealing with the services, we're also creating what we think of as the human in the loop workflow. How does the human work with the AI? How does the human work with other people? Some easy concepts to understand is the human might review it, the human might approve, what the AI generated. Also, another human may edit it. We're looking at services. There's a folder called services. So the architecture, although it sounds intimidating, one way to look at it is that it's a set of folders to hold your different pieces of logic. Within services, we have a subfolder called food description. Within food description, there is a file underscore underscore init underscore underscore dot py. It's a special file type of name in Python. We're going to create a new file within this folder. The new file will be called draft management because we're creating AI generated content, but obviously you want a human to review it and not have the AI take control of your store and just start wildly writing content on it. The AI is, as you know, prone to mistakes. So we don't have this file yet. So this class will not be auto imported. Draft management is what we will call it. And in the food description, we will create the new file, which is draft underscore management dot py. And that's looking better, but we don't have this class yet. Okay, let's go back to this init. And when it says all here, we also want to grab the food we didn't name the class yet. Description draft management. Okay. So we'll go back to the draft underscore management file. We'll create a doc string. So we're using optional typing, and there is a class or data type optional, which it could be null or none. And we'll, from standard Python, we'll import the UUID. And we're using SQL Alchemy as our object relational mapper. And within SQL Alchemy project, we're using async IO to get async sessions and have the communication with the database be async. Using the asynchronous connection does make the application a little bit more complex, perhaps more error prone, sometimes to programming errors, but we're focused on using the async connections, even though there's no advantage at the simplicity of our application right now. We're trying to set ourselves up for the future. So the food description, we already created the file, right? It's right there. And the file that we're using is this one right here. And this SQL model is saying it's not found. It's a problem with the linter. So for some reason, this was not selected. You may have to go manually click on this on the bottom bar here and make sure that it's getting the Python within your virtual environment, .venv/bin/Python. This linter error is just that this particular thing is not used. So this CRUD is right here. We created it in the previous video. And within this file, we do have our primary class here, which is food description CRUD. So maybe I'll just copy it so it'll be even more obvious. Whoop, I didn't spell it correctly. All right. The linter errors are just saying that it's unused. So let's start creating our primary class, which is class food description draft management. And we'll create a doc string. Oops. And this should match what we defined in the init food description draft management, food description draft management. Okay, let's create the class. In previous videos, we used the static method, and we're still going to use that. And with this decorator, we can call the method without having to instantiate the class right above it. So let's do it. Async def. Let's update the description. The U of the CRUD. We'll have a session, which will be the async session, which we imported right there from SQL Alchemy, the async IO extension. We'll get the description ID, the description ID, and we'll use the built-in Python UUID, the unique identifier, and we imported it here. It's a standard Python package nowadays. We'll have the description should be a string. User ID will again be the UUID from standard Python. Okay. Then it will return the class of optional. So we just imported it at the beginning. Optional, which means it's okay to be none. A list of food description. And we'll put a little note for ourselves, possibly even the AI, if you modify this with AI in the future. Update a description only if it's a draft. Food description equals await food description CRUD. And because we use the static method, we can just grab it, get ID, and to get it by the ID, we need the session and we need the description ID. So we'll check to see if the food description is blank. And we'll return none if it is blank. Now we'll check to see if the status is not draft. If food description dot status, we know it because it's in the models, right? Food description status here, which is a string. Thanks to Pydantic, we can just pull it out. It's very nice. So if the status is not draft, colon. Oh, so this is exclamation point equal sign. I guess it's appearing in this format due to my Fura code font that I'm using. But it's exclamation point equal sign. Raise value error. So we want to make sure that it's a draft description before we edit it. And also we'll check the security, make sure that it can only be edited by the person that created it. So again, I'm putting exclamation point equal sign, and it's appearing that way due to my font that I'm using, which is Fura code. And I should probably change it to a different font. Edit your own descriptions. Food description dot description equals description. Food description dot update it at. Again, everything's from the model, so you can just look at it. But thanks to Pydantic, we have that beautiful autocomplete, which is pretty nice. And we'll just commit the session. Async await. We have to wait for it to make sure that it's finished doing it before we went to the next step. So we'll commit it. And then we will refresh the session with the food description. And then we'll return the food description. I guess this linter is telling me to use a newer style. Or none. Okay. Guess I don't need optional then. I'm using the rough linter, R-U-F-F. And this is not that critical, but it does look orange, so I might as well fix it. So it's rough. Maybe it's UV run rough. Check. And I'll fix it because it's only these are the main thing. And we got to get to that file where it's in services, food descriptions, draftmanagement.py. And it just resorted the import. So if you don't have rough installed, it's UV sync. I think it's all groups that will sync it. And the reason it will sync it is because in the PyProject.toml, there's the dependencies, which is updated with sync. But there's this dev dependency group, which is only synced with when you run either groups dev or all groups. And this will install rough. This also installed PyTest, which we'll get to in the future videos. Okay, let's create our next method. And after this next method, we'll take a break for the next video. So again, we're using a static method, so we can just call it without instantiation. We don't have to use self. Async def submit for review. And the session we'll get is again the async session. And we'll have the description ID. Description ID UID. Again, it's from the standard Python library, or it's built in. And let's do food description none. Put the little colon there. Submit a draft for review. We'll have the food description. We're going to await for the food description. Just access it, get by ID. Session and description ID. It's actually in the food description CRUD. And you can mouse over it and then check it. So if there's no food description, do the same thing, but return none. So I'm the exclamation point equal sign. We're going to check to see whether it's a draft again. And only if there's a draft will we take some action. draft descriptions. So we're going to change the status to pending review, and we'll change when it was updated to now, and we'll start in UTC format. We'll write the session to the database, and although we're not taking any action on the data, we'll just refresh it. Just in case there's something running in the database on the data that's in there, and we'll return the food description. Okay, in this table of contents, we've just completed step 3.2, which is the draft management, the update, and the submit for review. We're going to do step 3.3 in the next video, which is the review and publishing. There's another manager that the draft content is sent to. That person will approve, reject, publish methods with business rules. And then in step 3.4, we're going to use PyTest and set up a bunch of tests to test the service layer. And then we'll, there may be errors, but then we'll correct them in this layer. Previously, we did the database migrations and we designed the database model. After that, in the future, this is a few videos out, we'll create the routes and eventually create the UI templates so that we can start interacting with our application through the web interface. If you want to get help with the tutorial, get the source code, or you have some questions, kick an email over to my buddy Jesse Kasman, the president of OpKey, at jkasman@opkey.com. He's the guy right here. He's friendly. He likes to eat local mocos.